morning. It's lovely to see you all here. Welcome to our panel session this morning. It's called Keeping It Real. And we hope we live up to the title in the session. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Jessica Shibley. I'm the Head of Diversity and Inclusion for BBC Children's and Education. And today we're talking about the power of authenticity. And I think that's a topic, a theme, around representation, around authenticity, that's actually been right from the beginning of this conference, right with David's keynote, and that's been a thread that's through all the conversations that we're having. But here, I guess we want to talk about, what does it mean to keep it real for our audience, especially when it comes to scripted content? So we'll be talking about what do we mean when we say authentic content, and why is that important to our audience? Can they tell the difference? And how does that come about? What does that look like? What does that feel like? Obviously, this topic is something that I'm hugely passionate about, and we've got a brilliant panel here with us as well. So thrilled to be having this conversation, and there's a chance to ask questions in the room as well at the end. So just letting you know that there'll be some time for that. Let me introduce you to our brilliant panel. So firstly, on my left, we've got Dr. Supreet Mann. Supreet is the Director of Research at Common Sense Media in San Francisco. She holds a PhD in communication and an MS in child development. Her research considers the role of social influences on children's socio-emotional outcomes, including pro-social behavior, risk-taking, and learning. So it's great to have you here. Next, I'll introduce on my right, sort of in the middle of my panel, is Caitlin Hamilton. Caitlin trained at LAMDA and the National Youth Theatre. Her television credits include the wonderful A Kind of Spark, which we'll be talking about, but also EastEnders, The Village, and Doctors, all for the BBC. And she also has film credits, which include Nowhere Boy with Film 4. And then, continuing on my right, I've got Georgia de Gidlow. Georgia is an actor who most recently played Keedy Darrow, also in A Kind of Spark. Georgia is a politics and international relations student, just completing her final year at the University of Birmingham, and A Kind of Spark was her TV debut. And now, going to my left, we have Andy Mundy Castle. Andy is known for producing high-end content that authentically represents diverse communities. His work has been regarded highly as work that documents diverse experiences with authenticity and style, and includes the BAFTA-nominated Handle with Care for ITV. Andy is the owner and creator of the format of Go Green with the Grimwades, little whoop there, and Rue and Harper's Wonderworld, both on Milkshake TV. And lastly, on my left, we also have Tali Walters. Tali is the creative director for live action at BBC Studios Kids and Family. Whilst at BBC Studios, she's overseen the production of a vast number of shows, which include Phoenix Rise, which we'll be talking about, as well as Lagging, and a long-time fan favourite, The Dumping Ground. So what a brilliant panel we have. I think we'll just start with giving the panel a round of applause. Right, I think we'll just dive straight in. We'll get stuck straight in. So Supreet, I wanted to come to you first in terms of what is authentic representation and why does it matter?
Yeah, everyone, thank you so much for having me. So I think before I define authentic representation, I want to talk a little bit about what it is, provide some of the context, and I think that helps to lay the foundation for what authentic representation means in the larger context of what we're going to be discussing today. So to understand why authentic representation matters for children's content, it's really important to understand how children are developing their sense of self through their lifespan. So in very early childhood, children begin to understand who they are and how they feel. As they continue to develop, they begin to understand that other people have different thoughts and feelings than themselves. And as they continue to develop, they begin to understand how they fit in with those other people, sort of in relation to them, right? So they begin to understand themselves, others, and themselves in relation to others. And as children move through this developmental process, they begin to understand themselves in a very multidimensional way. That is, their sense of identity begins to form in various planes and in sort of intersecting ways. So children and adults both will often think of themselves in these different identity dimensions. So for example, they might think of themselves in sort of personal terms, right? I am kind, I am smart. They might think of themselves in more relational terms. I am a sister, I am a daughter. Or they might think of themselves in communal terms, right? In regards to their religious identity or maybe their ethnic racial identity. But what's really key here is that we don't often think of ourselves in only one dimension. We might have a dominant identity at any given time, but generally we think of ourselves in multidimensional and really intersecting ways. So what happens as children begin to develop these dimensions of identity is that they begin to connect with others, and this can include media figures. So we see this practically in the parasocial relationships that children form with media figures. So parasocial relationships are one-sided relationships that kids and adults alike can form with media figures. It often fosters a sense of perceived closeness with the media figure. It can foster feelings of friendship with the media figure. And these relationships absolutely happen with children and media figures, and they can be built on some of these different dimensions that I talked about. So for example, children don't feel closely connected with Elmo because Elmo is red and furry like they're red and furry, right? Children feel closely connected with Elmo because Elmo is funny like them, and Elmo has friends like them, and he's got conflicts and all these kinds of different intersecting personalities that reflect these children themselves.
Actually, can I ask a question on that? So I think it's such a crucial point that, yes, these intersecting kind of identities are absolutely vital, and I wanted to really discuss that a bit more because we don't just have one identity. But in that Elmo example, would you say that actually that emotional representation or that kind of emotional connection, I suppose, does that trump or does that override the importance of having that visible representation for our young audience?
Yeah, that's a great question. And as with so much of research, the answer is it depends, right? So it depends on really the age and stage of those children, where they are developmentally, and what they're latching onto as their sort of core sense of identity. In the Elmo example, we know that Elmo is made to represent a 3-year-old, right? So Elmo's supposed to have the cognitive, socio-emotional capacity of about a 3-year-old. And ethnic racial identity development, although the research is a little bit kind of skewed, but generally speaking, we think that ethnic racial identity really begins to develop when kids are about 4 years old or so. So if we really think about the kids that are watching and connecting with Elmo, for those kids, their ethnic racial identity, maybe the way they look and the way others look, might not be as salient to their identity as sort of like the silly factor, right? Or some of these other sort of prosocial factors.
That's an interesting one, and I'm sure we've got some questions that might come off the back of that, but no, thank you. Caitlin, can I come to you next?
Absolutely.
So growing up, what did representation mean to you?
I think for me, growing up, representation was something that was lacking a lot of the time. I think it was something you didn't really see. I think, obviously, I'm only 21 myself, so it wasn't too long ago that I was young, but it was a case of kind of seeing this ideal placed upon people that were typically normal in the view of society, and in this kind of box that was maybe a certain race, a certain ability, a certain, socioeconomic background. And I think for me, I never saw myself particularly represented in that. I think I was lucky because being a white person, I saw myself in that sense. But in the way that I function and the way my brain works was just never shown on television. And wanting to be an actor and growing up looking at these characters and thinking, there were sometimes coded characters, which are characters that are neurodiverse but not necessarily explicitly said to be neurodiverse. I would look at those characters and think, I relate to those, but I don't understand why I relate to those and not these. And the general character that I see isn't these kind of people. And what is that difference, and how do I relate to this but not to that? And it was just never discussed. And so I struggled a lot with identity and feeling very much on the outside, knowing that I felt different but I didn't belong anywhere. And so I didn't know it was autism. It wasn't spoken about. There was no women with autism in media. It just wasn't a thing. And so the only reason I got a diagnosis was because my singing teacher at the time said, "You remind me of my daughter, and she's autistic. Maybe you should get that checked out." And I was like, no, not at all. I was like, I'm fine, there's nothing wrong with me. And that is the issue, because that is what we have taken on board, that there has to be something wrong to be autistic, or there has to be something wrong to deviate from the social norms that we have. So representation really is just showing that no matter what box you fit in society, it's good and it's okay, and that it might not be shown as much as we want it to be, but we're getting there slowly. And that we should strive more for it, so that everybody watches something and goes, I can see myself in that.
Absolutely. And I think a lot of people in this room will agree with me that we feel that real sense now of responsibility to really reflect society. And actually, some of you that know me know that I like my data, but looking at some of the data that we've just had released from the UK census results actually shows us, like, in terms of the demographic of children and the demographic of society. So the NHS England has said that actually now between one in between 5 or 6 children is neurodivergent, and that's a significant population of children that then we have a duty to reflect, to serve, to represent, and I guess it's that mirror effect, but also that window effect of children being able to see other people's stories as well. Caitlin, can you tell me a bit about your experience on the Kind of Spark? Because obviously that has been absolutely groundbreaking. And it'd be nice to hear from your perspective, your experience.
Yeah, it was lovely to be on that show. I auditioned by fluke, like you audition for anything, the role kind of comes through your agent and you think, okay, yeah, cool. And I knew my character wasn't autistic. And I expected that, because I hadn't told my agents that I was autistic anyway. So all the roles I auditioned for were never for autistic characters. And so I saw the breakdown and saw that it was about autism, and I was like, no way. That is really cool. And the fact that, like, it wasn't just some of the shows that you see that are very stereotypical. Like, we've got one autistic character and we're going to focus on that, and it's usually a young boy around something similar to that, and the parents struggling. It was actually about a character who shows the positives and how they can thrive. Although that wasn't my character, I got to play a really good part in that, and I really wanted the role, and so getting it was amazing. And then I was like, do you know that I'm autistic too? And they were like, no, but that's a great coincidence. So I thought that's nice. On set, we had a lot of discussions about, like, textures and sounds and things that can be quite overwhelming, overstimulating. It was a very different experience for me. I'd been on sets before when I was younger, and I'd been told I was, like, badly behaved for being overstimulated. I didn't know I was overstimulated. I just knew it was difficult, and everyone else seemed to get on with it. Thought that made me a bad actor, and I was unemployable. But actually, what's given me a lot of, like, courage and bravery and empowerment from this project is knowing that, like, there's nothing wrong with needing to step out for 5 minutes, and there's nothing wrong with, I need to be told if we're going to have a really loud bang on set, please can you let me know? Because now I'm more aware of the fact that that's a right that I can give. And it's so good that I was taught that, because no one tells you can do that. No one gives you that permission to say, can I request something? Can I be that person that, I don't want to be a problem. I don't want to be unemployable. I want to be as good as I can for you. And so to be told that it's fine, you have that power, you're allowed to say that, and you're just as right as anybody else is in wanting those things. You're not a burden. You're not, an inconvenience to us. You're just a person that needs a requirement, and like anyone else would. And that was a really good thing, because now going forward, working on other things, I've brought that with me. And I've been able to say, like, this is a list of things, please could we accommodate them? Not being like, I'm making this a massive issue, but instead going, yeah, this is what I need, and that's okay. And I think A Kind of Spark really broke that barrier for me.
That's really powerful. And I think that is where we are looking for this whole industry to move. And that's across the media industry, that productions are set up to be accessible for everyone. And I guess even with those that have roles in commissioning as well as those in production, but it's just like, how do we make these environments and these sets and just the whole framework accessible, so that actually it's not like you're going, oh, I feel like a bit of a burden, or I'm asking for something that's above and beyond. But actually, the Equality Act, 2010, it's very, very clearly stated that actually those reasonable adjustments and that will look different for different people, and just actually owning that and actually asking the question, assuming that, if we look at, again, referring to some of the population stats, that, I think 15% of people, so earlier I quoted children, but actually 15% of adults are neurodivergent. So I guess it's just bearing that in mind. So expecting that on your teams there will be people that are neurodivergent, and I guess asking those questions. I guess you touched on this idea of being neurodivergent, being autistic, and playing a neurotypical character in Nina, who was brilliant.
Yeah.
Anything that you want to just sort of share in terms of reflections on how did you sort of do that?
I loved it, because it was in this show where we're not only showing the fact that you can be neurodiverse and play a neurodiverse character, which is fantastic because it's representation that we need. But it's also I have this little secret weapon where I got to play a neurotypical character too, and kind of show that you shouldn't pigeonhole actors into, just because I'm neurodiverse doesn't mean I can only play neurodiverse roles. It's no, I mean, I've always played neurotypical characters because that's what I just was always taught to do. And also in life, I'm always masking, so I have to do it anyway. And it's something that, it's a force of habit now. It's something that I'm so used to, and it shows that it's amazing that we have that representation, especially now, and especially in shows like this that are reaching so many people, but also that we can do this, but we can do so much more too, and that there's a lot of power in that. And hopefully it's opening the gates rather than kind of, you don't want representation and authenticity to box people. You want it to show and then expand, and I think that's what we should aim for.
Yeah. And I guess it's interesting because this conversation is very, very live at the moment in terms of authenticity in casting, and this idea that, yes, now the industry is demanding that authenticity. But then I've also heard other voices as well sort of saying, well, actually, it's acting. And it's really interesting having that discussion. And obviously people like Tom Hanks have come out and sort of said, actually, I wouldn't do Philadelphia if it was offered to me now as a heterosexual man playing a homosexual character. And then the other example that comes to mind is Hank Azaria saying, actually, I wouldn't voice Apu in The Simpsons with that, awful Indian accent. So I think that's acknowledged. But then where does that line come in, of saying, actually, it is a performance art, it is acting. Yeah. So demanding that people have that lived experience, what's your thoughts on that?
I think it's a really interesting point. I think that it does go back to the thing of, you're an actor though. But what's quite interesting when we dive into that is when you're acting, say, as a neurotypical person playing a neurotypical part, you're not being yourself. So when you're playing as a neurodiverse person playing a neurodiverse character, you're still not being yourself. It's still a character, right? It's it's still different. And although you understand what autism feels like, or maybe dyslexia, or anything to do with the neurodiversity, although you understand it on a personal level, you're still having to put that into a character. You're still having to manipulate that, and you're still having to change it. It's not you. It's a character that someone's written. And so that's where the acting comes in, I think. It's also important to look at it I don't think there's necessarily a problem with neurotypical people playing neurodiverse characters if we were at a point where it had been done for years, where we'd seen it and it wasn't a new thing that we're stepping into. It wasn't kind of like, it's not a point where it's been equal for a while. And until we get to that point, I don't think we can backtrack it yet. It's going to do way too much harm. We don't know what all life looks like from the people that experience it yet. We haven't had that true representation, and until we do, I don't think we should branch out into actors playing characters like that, because I just think it would be damaging for those groups of people. But hopefully in the future, if we do get to a point where it's so equal, it's so, the opportunity and the outcome is so equal and it's so open, maybe we will. But until then, I don't think that's something that we should consider. I think it's something that we should keep going with people that understand it, and play characters that are still different to them but come from a true lived experience.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Georgia, I want to come to you next, but actually I thought it would be a really nice moment to maybe go to the clip for a kind of spark.
Okay, listen up. You're moving school buildings. It's a big change. Here's what you need to know. The main site corridors get busy, really loud. You have to wait until a bit after the bell and then head out. It's usually a bit less, The C-block bathrooms are the worst. Don't go in there at break. Whoever designed the upper school definitely wasn't thinking about autistic kids. Found it. Here. I used this the whole of my first year there.
Did people notice?
No way. High school kids are obsessed with themselves. Oh, hi, Nina.
What are you two still doing in here?
Come on! There's just a lot more kids, a lot more bells, announcements, a lot more everything, everywhere.
I can't wait.
Look, Addie, there's gonna be times when masking won't work and you might feel like you're gonna shut down. Can I?
Sure.
Maybe something like that?
I do this. A spiral.
Perfect. You're perfect.
Toast for you and one for you. Hurry up. We are so late.
Okay, let's do this.
You are never still here.
Everything is fine.
Come on. Look after each other.
I love that. Everything is fine. Georgia, look, that Kidi is absolutely brilliant. I've obviously watched the whole series, binge watched it, and Kidi's character is larger than life. She's a character you get really drawn to. She's obviously, even in the show, she's popular. But in some ways, you could say that actually that's not the kind of sort of personality or sort of, character that comes to mind when people think of an autistic person.
Yeah, no kidding.
So go on, tell me some of your thoughts around Kidi.
I was so I was so happy when I got cast for Kidi. I mean, I'd read the book before. I cried the whole way through. It was when we talk about what it means to have representation, I have never felt represented for being a neurodivergent person. Which, I don't know, I didn't realise how much it meant to me until I had it. I never thought, before, I was like, oh, it'd be great. I don't know, it was never something that crossed my mind. And then when I kind of read the book and I was like, oh, this exists? And then I saw Kidi and I was like, what? She's cool and she's outspoken, justice-oriented. She gets in trouble for accidentally being too justice-oriented, and adults don't like that, sometimes. They don't like the change that often, I think, neurodiverse people like me or neurodivergent people like me are going, well, that makes logical sense, why wouldn't you do this? I don't know. So it was cool. It was cool to play Kidi. It was cool to show that someone who masks a lot, the effects of that, the burnout, the stimming, and I don't know, when we go back to your question about why it's good that neurodivergent people play neurodivergent people, specifically autistic people play autistic people, I think as a neurotypical person, you know, you're acting, like, that's a big job, you know, when you don't understand the nuances of a neurodivergent person's life or an autistic person's life. Like, that's a big job. You're pretending to be someone who's pretending to be someone. That's layered. Like, you've got to be, like, really good. So, you know, yeah, it was great. It was, I got that, you know, that's instinctive for me. So it's not necessarily about whether it's right, but it's going to be better, I think. If you cast autistic people as autistic people, it's going to resonate more with the audience. It's going to make girls go, that's me. Like, you know, even though, like, there were so many different types of personalities and identities who were playing autistic characters on this show. And they were so varied. And with every single one of them, the audience was like, the autistic audience were like, I do that, or I do that, or I do that. So it didn't matter who they were or what personality they had. Through the performance, their authentic performance, they were able to display traits that the audience always related to. So I don't know, like, yeah. That's
I think, and actually you mentioned obviously the writing, and for those that might not be aware, so A Kind of Spark is based on the book A Kind of Spark, written by Elle McNichol, who herself is a neurodivergent writer, and I guess, you know, that came through, like, in you know, everything that we saw on screen, and in terms of audience impact, what are some of the things that have really resonated?
I don't know, a lot of people. There was a couple comments that I read of, like, oh, my young child today hasn't gone out with their, like, earphones on in months, and after watching A Kind of Spark, they've gone out today proudly wearing their earphones, or, you know, they've kind of proudly gone, oh, I'm autistic. Like, you know, there's challenges, and, like, that's represented in the show as well, which is obviously because it was written by an autistic person. You understand, like, you don't want to just be like, I don't know, showing the positives. You need to show the negatives as well. You need to normalise the challenges. But also it's, like, empowering a community of young people who are going to feel so isolated at school. It's, I don't know, it's nice to know.
And I guess what's been powerful about this title is seeing multiple neurodivergent people in the show. So it's not one representation, it's actually lots of different ways of seeing that.
Yeah, it would be great. I'd love in the future to see even more, like you were talking about intersecting identities, even more. I mean, I'm queer. Like, a lot of the other people on the show were queer or AFAB. But yeah, the more intersecting identities you add onto a character, the more interesting the performance. It's going to be better for the audience to watch. You're going to be like, you know, there's the more intersecting identities, the more challenges, the more complexity to the performance. You know, it's going to be like, it's good for the audience as well. It makes it a more interesting and engaging watch. So yeah, that would be great to see more of that, hopefully, in the future too.
Amazing. I'm going to come to my left-hand side, Tali. So I wanted to talk to you about Phoenix Rise. And obviously, in Phoenix Rise, we see a lot of representation in terms of socioeconomic, we see regional, we see ethnicity. So what was the kind of thought process in terms of, just bringing that authenticity to Phoenix Rise?
So Phoenix Rise is a story that's really got a specific region at its heart. It's set in the West Midlands, and our writers, the creators of the show, Matt and Perry, are both from there. So we were always going to aim to keep that region at the very heart, and we couldn't aim for anything less than true regional authenticity. And for us, that looked like a lot of things, but we thought really carefully about it, and we really centred our casting efforts in that area. And we also wanted to add some open castings, recognising that actually attendance to a casting, big barrier can be representation. Holding some open castings, as much work as that added, that was really, really important. And we were really, really pleased to be able to get most of our leads from the local area. And that really paid off on set, listening to their accents, what they were able to add in terms of changing their dialogue a little bit, some influence on wardrobe was really, really important. And they were also so excited to be showing Coventry, a place that doesn't end up on our TV screens very often, and bringing that excitement to set every day of this is it, this is where I'm from, and this is what I'm bringing to it, and that you know, some of their lived experience was really important. And actually talking about wardrobe, it was really interesting for the whole crew, I think, to realise that around the UK, there's different style, there's different subtleties.
That's
you know,
really
like people's different fashion, like changes, whether you're in Scotland or whether you're in Cornwall. People dress slightly differently. And sending our wardrobe teams out to go and sit in the centre of Coventry shopping centre and having a look what everybody was wearing, and that to be able to influence was really important. And also our music, our soundtrack was something that was really important to us from the outset. We didn't want to have library tracks. We didn't want to. So to be able to take our music supervisor and say, hey, do you know what? Music in the West Midlands is really different. It sounds really different. It's got its own scene going on. And for them to go out and look for the most exciting unsigned artists from the area and bring them in to create our soundtrack really helped us to create something that was authentically from the Midlands. And I think anything less wouldn't have worked for that show.
That sounds brilliant. Should we take a look?
Yes.
Let's have a look. This is Phoenix Rise.
Welcome to Phoenix Rise. You all deserve a clean slate. This is where that starts.
How hard can it be?
Don't worry about your past. At Phoenix Rise, we focus on the future.
Even if they say we're unteachable. I've been thrown out of every school in the Midlands. One more bad move and I am.
Apparently it's pointless as pre kids aiming for anything positive in life as a future's already written.
Sounds about right to me. Just want to keep my head down. No drama. I ain't your mate.
Is it true what happened at your last school?
Who are you?
Whoever my mum wants me to be.
Break a leg.
Do you want to do something?
Like a date?
Best stay away, yeah? You don't want to end up like me.
Never your fault, is it? Kids like you.
Kids like me what?
Someone's got to liven things up around here.
Phoenix Rise! Who's ready for start? Alright, guys.
I never said it was going to be a smooth ride.
Whatever it is that you're hiding, I'm onto you.
They don't like us because we're different. But maybe that's our strength.
We're in this together. If one of us goes down, we all go down.
Welcome to a new term.
I mean, that's absolutely brilliant, and highly recommend those that haven't seen it. Brilliant series. It's really interesting, I guess, talking about kind of that appeal and obviously getting the wardrobe, the music, and we saw that actually in this clip. Were there certain considerations you had to make in terms of, I guess, when we look at some of the streamer content we see on other platforms, maybe some of the American content, sometimes there is this kind of glossiness, this kind of aspirational kind of content. And then here, obviously, the intention is very much to like represent Coventry, represent, real children and their lives. And so I guess, but then you also want to make it really attractive and cool. So what were the kind of conversations and considerations kind of, going into that?
I'm a real believer that they don't, there seems to be this kind of perception that you can either have that glossy international thing or you can have the UK thing. And I don't really think that's true, actually. I think there's this expectation, especially when you set your story somewhere like that's an industrial town or somebody that is somewhere that people expect to have a bit of a lower socioeconomic background or story, that it's going to have a particular UK look that might be a bit gritty or a bit dark.
Grey.
And I think especially when we're talking about youth audiences, that's not how they see the places that they're from. And it was really important to us before we made Phoenix that we were able to capture some of the optimism of youth and some of the vibrancy of Coventry and the colourfulness of Coventry and really see it through people's eyes. I think having an off-screen crew that also wanted to celebrate that region with us, that had some experience of those places, and be able to bring that optimism of youth and subvert the expectations of somewhere like Coventry was really important.
That's amazing. And actually, you mentioned the off-screen crew, because I think with authenticity, it's yes, obviously we've talked a lot about kind of on-screen and authentic casting, but I guess off-screen is just as important, whether it's writing, as we talked about with kind of Spark, but yeah, what was the off-screen kind of representation and the efforts put into making sure that was authentic?
Well, as I mentioned, our writer-creators are from the area, which was really important. And then I think having members of the crew, having a real mix of socioeconomic backgrounds within our crew was really important. I think we tied ourselves in knots thinking about the wardrobe at the beginning in terms of some of our producers saying, well, hold on a second, these kids don't have a huge amount of money and that should be reflected in our wardrobe. It's actually Perry, a writer-creator, who said, no, hold on a second. If you grow up without much money, if you grow up in this area, what you wear is the most important thing you have, and you spend a lot of time swapping clothes with your friends and adding personal touches, and we changed our uniforms like this, and that was a really important bit of inspiration to bring in there and make sure that that was authentically reflected in the show. And I think in design as well, you know, making sure that the places, you know, we saw some council estates, making sure that those places were reflected in somewhere that celebrated the optimism and community of the area, came from our crew and came from them being from the area and being really keen to celebrate it.
That's brilliant. And what about audiences? Like, what has been kind of some of the response and impact that you've seen?
It's so exciting to go to Coventry and see the reaction from kids who don't necessarily hear, or even their accents from the local area.
Yeah.
We had our premiere at a local school, and the kid, you may as well have been the Oscars, that we rocked with all of the cast.
That's so nice.
And it was brilliant. It was really brilliant. And I think, you know, they don't necessarily see themselves or hear themselves on television very often. They can't point to many shows that are made there. And just even to hear their accents was really, really important to the audience.
Yeah, and I think that's the power of what we're all doing, isn't it, in terms of media, like kids seeing themselves, feeling like their stories are heard, and yeah, whether it's how they look, whether their family's set up, what kind of place they live in.
Also for them to say at the premiere, you know, well, then I can work in television, you know, to see, obviously we took lots of our crew members to that premiere as well, and for kids say, oh, well, if I want to be a hairdresser, I could be a hairdresser in television then, because if you're making TV down the road, then that's something that I can get involved with. It was really, really satisfying.
Yeah, because that's making it possible then, isn't it? And that's huge. Andy, hi.
Hello.
Impatiently. Andy, obviously you're managing director of Doc Hearts. There is a lot of conversation, I think, happening across broadcasters around sort of, I guess, working with different production companies that we haven't always worked with for the last 10 years, for example. And I guess there is a lot of conversation, acknowledgement about the value of working with diverse-led indies. And certainly at the BBC, we have commitments, we have measurements around that. And it's very much part of our 100 million commitment that we've made around our diverse content. I guess what does that mean from your perspective? Like, what do you think you bring to the industry in terms of authenticity and representation?
I think, I mean, I know probably every black-led company in the country, and
that's quite a statement. That's quite a statement.
That's volumes, right? So I suppose I set up the company simply because I was looking at where I existed in exec roles, in commissioning roles, or higher up in the table, and that just wasn't visible. I remember, I think, my last job actually was at the BBC before I set up the company, but that was the best learning that I had. And I just realised that for me, there was definitely a very visible glass ceiling that was not going to be penetrated. And so, you know, I'd spend nights just looking at companies, all sort of the top 50 companies, and you look at the exec level team, the C-suite team, and as a black man, I just didn't see myself. So, you know, and then coming from where I come from, on the worst estates in South London, Brixton, you know, this is somewhere that I just shouldn't be if I lived up to a stereotype. So when I look at that and I take my lived experience and my entrepreneurial drive, which comes from my mum, you know, I sort of put that all in a washing machine and said, well, what do I want? What do I want that to become? Because I know that it takes a real sort of iron stomach and guts and risk and, you know, the understanding of risk and reward to venture into that business. So I decided to set up the company to agitate change and, you know, inspire others and really tell the stories that I knew I could tell that nobody else could tell.
Love that,
That was it was essentially that. You know, I think there is something about authentic representation, that when it comes from someone, as was mentioned earlier on, when it comes from someone who has that lived experience, you really offer a different texture and a different sensibility, really just that goes beyond the grain. You know, there was a film that we actually had playing in this auditorium about 3 weeks ago at the Sheffield Dog Fest, because we make documentaries for both adults and children. You know, and I realised, I was very sort of, you know, I was proud that we got it into the festival, but also I realised that the response that was given to that was simply because it had been the sort of the African diasporic experience was talked about in such a way that everybody in the room could feel that heart. They could feel what was coming through that content in a way that I just think anyone else who was making that wouldn't have quite hit that mark, you know. And I think when you come from that starting point, it's real. You're not having to force it.
Yeah, exactly. And I guess it's that storytelling, isn't it? And we all have stories. And I think it's just, you know, it can feel so othering when someone's trying to tell your story for you, and without having that lived experience. So absolutely, I liked what you said about agitate, change, and inspire. And that being kind of your driver to set up.
Probably not the best driver for business, but you know, it's working at the moment, because you know, I think that we can pull some levers that actually allow us to operate.
So can I ask then, do you feel that then, because you know Doc Hearts is as you said a black-led indie, do you then feel that you sometimes get boxed in about the kind of content that you're expected to create?
Well, I suppose, you see, I don't label myself I don't label the company a black-led indie. Actually, we lead with documentaries first. But I know that if there is an opportunity, say for Black History Month or what have you, and that brief goes out, that I would rather we looked after it and made sure we gave it something that was different and very specific to that. But then, you know, the ideas are always what lead, right? So, you know, I kind of feel like if an idea goes into a broadcaster, into a commissioner, you know, that it's essentially, well, how strong is that idea? And the fact that we are Black-run, Black-owned, African diasporic-owned, we are, you know, we give it something, and that I suppose is what is the Brucey bonus, you know, so to speak. You know, it's like that if that helps tick a box, then you know it does. But I can't work to those metrics, because for us, the metric that I exist by is actually just turning over and keeping people employed, and making sure that the mission we started keeps growing, and that the company goes to a place that we can actually help other people make their own content and you know, kind of champion the voices that are sort of hidden in plain sight.
Yeah, and it's interesting because you mentioned metrics, and there are a lot of metrics. We are measuring through Diamond, you know, sort of lots of broadcasts are measuring our on-screen diversity in terms of ethnicity, disability, gender, to name a few. We're measuring off-screen representation. So we're measuring, I guess you could say, quantity. And I think this was in the keynote, and David said, but are we measuring, you know, have we got metrics to measure the lives changed from our audiences? Are we measuring impact, really? Are we measuring authenticity? And whilst, you know, we've got all this data, I suppose, and we're tracking it, and rightly so, actually, that we are tracking, you know, the companies that we're working with, how many new people we're bringing into productions, you know, and obviously on-screen and off-screen representation. I think this is the bit that's missing, and is obviously very hard to do, but the impact that it has when the content is made authentically.
I think you're asking about sort of how we regard the metrics,
thoughts
on that. It's interesting because I think I'm actually I'm speaking to more and more Black creatives, or you know, Black and brown creatives, who are finding it, the environments in which they're working in more established companies, in more established broadcasters, hostile environments, you know, and when we talk about the quality, you know, the data is one thing, but as you've just referenced, that what someone has to go through to be an imposter and on top of an imposter, you know, is actually it's taxing. It's extremely taxing. And so I always say, you know, the amount of people I speak to who are like, well, what, how do we deal with this? How have you dealt with this? And, you know, obviously I dealt with it through setting up a company and sort of exercising my own creativity through that. I wouldn't recommend that for everybody because that is also taxing. But it's interesting what that does to the creative mind, because how can you be creative when you are not walking into a building feeling like I'm going to give you everything about the person that I am, and this is who I am, and my creativity matters because actually it offers a very different perspective to you.
Okay. Yeah. And so then, to feel less like an imposter in those environments, what do you think is the change that's required?
It's a really hard thing to answer as a person that's been on the receiving end of, kind of unjust processes. And I think that the kind of burden of responsibility has to shift from those that experience the change to those that are, actioning the kind of the levers of sort of, an imbalanced environment. Because it's easy to sort of say, well, how do you feel and how do you overcome this? But actually, I think, the diversity and inclusion isn't something that we've created. It's been here since time immemorial. We are all different.
Yeah.
And I think that there has to be a space in which everybody is allowed to thrive and exercise their best possible, work, really, because that will only be for I think, and when you look at the landscape of where we're working, currently, children's content in general, we're in the OK corral of content, like the amount of platforms that come up every week and social media platforms that are offering those young, precious minds, so many different avenues in which they can go and do things, create worlds, create avatars, create that sort of sense of who they are. Telly in particular, we have to sort of, the traditional sense of broadcasting, we have to fight very hard to sort of say, well, actually, this is a place that you need to value and that you can see value within yourself. Because the danger is they go into that very wild, wild west of where they are flocking to. And then it's a whole different ballgame. And so where do we sit? As an industry, where do we sort of kind of maintain that value of what it is that we are here for and what we exist for? And I think by sort of creating a harnessed place in which everybody can feel like they can thrive, actually is preparing us for a better future.
Absolutely. Let's talk about the Grimwades. Obviously, you've done Go Green with the Grimwades, and recently, I think it was in May, that Rue and Harper's Wonderworld came out. Should we have a look and then we can talk a bit about it?
Hi, I'm Rue. And I'm Harper. Do you want to see our magic day? Yeah, well, follow us. Hurry up, Rue. I'm coming. Welcome to our Wonderworld.
Oh, what's that? Oh, hi, Rue and Harper. You made me jump.
Hello, Wonderpie.
Are you here to meet some new friends for a play date?
Yeah. We want to have an adventure. Yeah, to have some fun.
Great, you're in the right place. I've got some play dates ready and waiting. Their families are from all around the world, and now they live in the United Kingdom, just like your family.
Yeah.
Harper and Rue live with their family.
Hi.
Older brother Hezzy.
Hi, Hez. Hello.
Sisters Hosanna.
Hello.
Hallie, Houston, and Halo.
Hi,
Hello.
And of course, Mum and Dad. Their grandparents live close by too.
Hello. Hi, Grandma.
One grandma grew up in England, and the other much further away in Jamaica. Are you ready to go on a play date with a new friend?
Yeah.
Shall we play a game to find out which place we'll be finding out about today?
I love games.
Here we go. Clue number 1. Where is this flag from?
Is it Turkey? Could it be Morocco?
Not this time. Let's see if clue number 2 helps.
I just wanted to talk a bit. I mean, that was absolutely brilliant to see, and actually, that representation itself is unique, and I think we're seeing more of now in terms of dual heritage representation, and again, the census results showed that actually the current population of the UK of under 15, 7% are from dual heritage backgrounds, and that population is just growing. So it's brilliant to see that, you know, a lot of children will be seeing that, oh, that's like my family. I want to talk about the Grimways because it's very interesting. They started off as a family putting content on YouTube, and I guess when we're talking about authenticity, a lot of audiences, especially young audiences, go to YouTube because they see that to be more accessible, more authentic at times. And then obviously it's kind of got made into a commission title for Milkshake, Go Green with the Grimways, and now we're in Harper's Wonderworld. I just wanted to talk about in terms of, how do you then keep that authenticity when it's kind of that scripted reality almost?
I suppose I looked at the family as a family of talent, basically, and it was what they do on their YouTube channel is of course totally different. But we looked at how we could put a TV framework, TV format around what it was that they felt comfortable with. So in essence, sort of gamifying and formatting what it was that they were already doing, and giving them the framework, the professional framework of a TV production, you know, and the crew and all the rest of it, which they don't have. It's just dad shooting. And it's a very different world. Again, back to what I was saying about that kind of landscape of social media content, is that actually they're a law upon themselves. I think in the first season, the amount of challenges that we had to have off screen, you know, that we couldn't do this because they were so used to actually, we want to shoot this today because we're going down to the supermarket to talk about buying X. And we can just do that, and we edit it and we put it out by 7 o'clock that evening, and they get millions of views. You know, for us, it's a whole different process, right? So it was, I suppose, keeping the authenticity was just looking at the strengths of the family and really kind of allowing them to be themselves within this sort of engineered framework. But yeah, I mean, fortunately, we'd spent a lot of time talking them through the process and really understanding what was key for them to get out within this.
Brilliant. I'm conscious that we promised that there'd be a chance for you guys in the audience to ask questions. So feel free. I think there are some roaming mics. So yeah, feel free to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. I can see a hand at the back there.
My name's Alex. I'm a student at the University of Hertfordshire, and I'm mixed race. My dad's family is Jamaican and my mum's family is white. So to see that representation on screen is really heartwarming. It's really incredible to see. As someone looking to get into like creative development for more inclusive and diverse media, what is for the whole panel, what do you find is the key to striking the balance between presenting an inherent difference as still special and unique while keeping it normalized as a part of the society in which we live? So even though it's this thing that should be honored and seen as different, it's still something that is normal and is a functional part of the society we're in.
I feel like
go for it.
I feel like the key to that is if that representation needs to be like story focused. It shouldn't be the story is about this difference. It should be this is someone with a difference who's having an adventure or is experiencing, you know, XYZ. Like, so the actual like whole, I don't know, TV show, film, whatever, is about an amazing story, but the main characters, the lead characters in that are different. So people feel represented, but, you know, it's still an engaging show, and it's not about that difference. It doesn't. So it feels less isolating if it's about that difference. It's just like they have a difference and they're experiencing life. I feel like. Yeah,
it's awesome. Thank you. Anyone else want to?
No, just that was a great question. You've got a bright future, young man.
I can see another hand at the back.
Thank you. Hello, I'm Lottie from King Banana TV. I was very inspired by everything you guys said. I think it's absolutely brilliant. But I just wanted to ask a bit more about how you feel, Tali kind of touched on it, but how you feel we can really inspire like people from a grassroots perspective to understand that there are careers that they can come into in this industry, because I think unless they get that from quite a young age, actually, it's really hard for some people to understand that there's that possibility. I mean, I think it's really hard even for people who have a lot of opportunity to understand that there are those jobs out there and there are those possibilities, but especially for people who don't have as much of that opportunity, how do we reach them?
I think the whole industry is doing some really good work at the moment. I think that process is starting. I think I personally would like to see a bit more of a balanced emphasis on not just, so often we see schemes that are aimed at inspiring the next generation of directors and writers, and that's seen as this incredibly aspirational career. But there's so many other bits to TV. There's so many other good fun bits. There's so many, you meet wardrobe designers and sound designers. And I think if we can try and broaden out some of our schemes to capture people who might be thinking about careers in hairdressing or makeup or other things, I think that would be a really important place to put our focus. And again, the regionality. I think if you only see shows that are made in London and Manchester, you might think, well, I'm going to have to move to London and Manchester or Bristol if I want a career in television. I think some of the work that's being done at the moment to make sure that we keep filming in the North East and in other parts of the UK are really important. Otherwise, you're not going to think that TV is for you.
I have a point to say, if that's all right. I really like that as a question, because I come from Stoke-on-Trent and it's a place where there is nothing really. I think we have, in terms of like representation for film and media, I always knew I wanted to be an actor, but like you just don't see it. I think the one claim to fame we've got is Robbie Williams. That's about it. And so I think there's a thing where you're just not told it's something you can do. And I mean that from like the roots of school, because the amount of conversations I had where it was like, what's your plan B though? What is it? Because like there's no way that you're gonna, without being rich or without having that, family in London or family, in Manchester, maybe that are already in media or know something about it. It's so unlikely that you're going to be able to fund yourself, that you're going to be able to seek out those opportunities. And it's I've been very, very fortunate because I've, managed to go to a drama school when I was funded by a charity. If I wasn't, couldn't have done it. I wouldn't have been able to afford it. And so I think we need to give opportunities. Schemes are great things, but they're only good if people know about them. Most of the time that, they're hidden away on websites that unless you already know people that do things like that, how do you even know how to search them in the first place? And so I think we just need to get to the root, of schools and to people that are growing up where no one's talking about it. They're not in them circles where it is discussed, and get to speak to people like that and show them there are ways they can get into industries, no matter what within the media you want to be in.
Absolutely, and I think this is what really came across in the keynote as well on Tuesday night. Sort of the kind of almost systemic disadvantages that have been built into some of these systems that are supposed to exist at grassroots to kind of provide access, but actually do the opposite. So
just quickly, something practical that I do is just look in unfamiliar places to offer placements, or just for for instance, I'm part of a group of dads, and I basically, whenever we've got a production going on, I would if we have the opportunity for someone who isn't who's emerging, that hasn't had an experience before, I post it in there rather than say in typical TV circles, because then that kind of, if there is someone who just doesn't know how to get the lever in, it's a nice way to offer that opportunity.
Brilliant. I'm conscious I've got the red light flashing, so I think we're out of time. But thank you so much. Thank you to our brilliant panel. Thank you.